The suitcase was half open on the bed, its contents spilling like a confession Jackson didn't remember making. A rolled-up hoodie, 2 shirts too new to have memories yet, and a travel-sized shaving kit sat waiting for a trip that was never going to happen. The California coast, Carmel, Big Sur, Monterey. It was all supposed to be a soft reset, their 10-year exhale, as Jackson had once called it. Something to reconnect them, or at least allow them to pretend for 2 weeks that things weren't breaking. "Did you pack the chargers?" Jackson asked, his voice too light for the weight in the room. Lena didn't look up from her careful folding. She placed a blouse into her own bag. Not the large navy suitcase she used for vacations, but the small black duffel she used when visiting her sister. Her fingers moved like they were afraid to stop. "Yeah," she replied quietly. Jackson paused. "You're bringing the duffel?" Lena exhaled sharply, not frustration, not anger, something like sorrow. Her hands hovered over the zipper. "I'm not going," she said. He blinked, unsure if he'd misheard. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer right away. She stood straight, wiped her palms on her jeans like her hands were sweating. Finally, she turned to him, her eyes unreadable. "I'm not going on the trip. And I think I want a divorce." The silence after her words wasn't stunned. It was final, a sentence that had been loaded in a chamber for months, maybe years. Fired not in anger, but resignation. Jackson opened his mouth, then closed it. His fingers tightened around the edge of the suitcase. "You're serious." "I've been serious for a long time, Jackson. I just didn't say it out loud." He felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under him, and he was still pretending to stand. Jackson didn't follow her when she walked out. He sat down on the edge of the bed, right beside the suitcase that now felt more like a tomb than luggage. The bedroom, once full of mundane details, scattered socks, half-read books, her perfume lingering near the mirror, was suddenly foreign, unfamiliar in its emptiness. She was gone. Not angrily, not yelling, just gone. That somehow made it worse. He stood up and walked aimlessly through the house. Every corner of it echoed. The kitchen counter where she used to sip coffee, in silence. The sofa where they spent whole evenings binge-watching shows without speaking. The tiny scuff on the hallway wall from when they moved the couch together. Everything was still there. Everything but her. He picked up his phone, considered texting her, and then set it down again. What could he say? "Come back?" No. That felt dishonest. "Let's talk." They'd talked before. Talking hadn't worked. Jackson wandered into the guest room and sat at the edge of the neatly made bed. This had once been Lena's office, back when she worked from home. He still remembered how she'd painted the walls herself, a pale seafoam green. She called it her breathing color. Now it just looked like paint. On the desk sat a photo of them still in its frame. Lake Tahoe 7 years ago. She had her arms around him, sunglasses crooked on her face, both of them grinning like idiots. That was before the fights got quieter, before apologies turned into silence. He went back to the bedroom and looked at the suitcase. With a sudden impulse, he unzipped it and started throwing the clothes back into the drawer. Not neatly, not angrily, just automatically. He couldn't bear to see it lying open anymore. When he was done, he lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The light through the blinds cut across his face in lines, as if the sun itself was dividing him. That night, Jackson didn't cry. Not because he wasn't hurt, but because the numbness had taken over first. There was a time when Jackson and Lena couldn't go more than 2 hours without seeing each other. It was the summer of 2011, at a music festival in Seattle when they met. She was lost, trying to find the Thai food stand. He was holding 2 tacos and a festival map, like he was some kind of tour guide. They joked around, shared a soda, and by the time the night was over, they were dancing under the lights of the second stage, their hands brushing for the first time like they'd known each other forever. They dated for almost 2 years before moving in together. The apartment was tiny and patched together with makeshift charm, a bookshelf made of wine crates, a table Lena inherited from her grandmother, and plants that always died and got replaced. But the place was full of life. Noise, quick kisses between rushed dinners, movie nights on the living room floor. They got married in 2014, a simple ceremony in her mother's backyard. Jackson remembered how Lena's hands trembled slightly as she read her vows, not from fear but from feeling. He promised that day he'd do everything he could to make sure she never felt alone in the world. But the world changes. His job started demanding constant travel. Hers became increasingly remote and isolating. Lunches turned into solo meals. Morning kisses became rare. When they argued, it wasn't loud. It was silent. A heavy silence, thick with the things they didn't say. The first time she cried in the shower so he wouldn't hear was 2 years ago. The first time he slept on the couch wasn't out of anger. It was relief. Still they tried. Planned dinners, weekend marathons of old movies, toasts over wine that ended in awkward silences. What kept them together wasn't love anymore. It was habit, and that was slowly killing them. Jackson thought about all of it now, lying in the dark, not with longing, but like someone staring at the wreckage of a crash, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Lena shut the car door harder than she meant to. The early afternoon air in Portland felt heavy, like even the sky was tired. Her sister's house was only 20 minutes away, but the drive felt like it took an hour. Carla greeted her with the kind of hug that doesn't ask questions. Lena just dropped her suitcase on the floor and stood there in the hallway, as if her body were suspended between two lives. The one she'd just left, and the one she wasn't sure she wanted to build. "Want some tea?" Carla asked, her voice soft and without judgment. "Yeah," Lena replied. But that's not what she wanted. She wanted silence. She wanted to erase the sound of Jackson's voice saying, "Are you serious?" She wanted to forget the look in his eyes. But more than anything, she wanted to forget who she had become in that marriage. While the kettle hissed in the kitchen, Lena curled up on the living room couch, hugging her knees to her chest. Everything about her felt tight, her shoulders, her chest, her spirit. What she felt wasn't anger, it was grief. For who they had been, for what they had tried to be, for what they had pretended to be for so long. For a long time, Lena convinced herself things would get better. That the silence would break with a trip, a gesture, an honest conversation. But Jackson was never one to say how he felt. And she, after trying for so long, had grown tired of being the only one trying. The hardest part wasn't that he changed, it was that he didn't see she had changed too, that she needed to be looked at again, really listened to. "Have you talked to him since you left?" Carla asked, handing her the mug. "No. He'll reach out. Maybe, but I'm not sure if I want him to, or if I just want him to understand me, even from a distance." Carla didn't respond. She just sat beside her sister, gently running a hand across her back. The tea cooled in silence. That night, Lena cried alone in the guest room, clutching. A pillow like it might give her back the years she spent just trying to be heard. It had been 11 days. Jackson knew because he'd been counting. Not with a calendar or a checklist, but in the rhythm of his mornings. 1 coffee cup instead of 2, 1 plate in the sink, 1 toothbrush by the mirror. Every habit had become a reminder. He didn't text her. He thought about it every day, sometimes multiple times a day. But he didn't want to say the wrong thing. Or maybe he didn't want to say anything at all, afraid of what her silence might confirm. It was on a Thursday morning, while he was staring blankly at an untouched bowl of cereal, that her message arrived. "Lena, I didn't want to leave like that, but I had to." He read it 5 times before typing a reply. "Jackson, then why wait until the day of the trip?" There was no response for hours. He went about his day in a fog, returning emails he didn't remember reading, sitting through meetings where words blurred together. By the time the sky darkened, he'd nearly convinced himself she wasn't going to write back. Then his phone buzzed. "Lena, because I kept hoping I'd feel something. That morning I stared at you and thought, maybe it would come back, the warmth, the want, but it didn't. I felt like I was playing a part in a life that wasn't mine anymore." Jackson's throat tightened. He put the phone down, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and just stood there. What did you say to that? Eventually, he wrote, Jackson, you weren't the only one who felt like that. I just didn't know what to do with it. She read it. He saw the read at 9:18 p.m. But no reply came that night. And that was okay. Because for the first time in weeks, the silence between them didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like a pause. A week later, she suggested coffee. Lena, there's a place on Hawthorne. Saturday morning, just to talk. He stared at the message for a long time. It was casual, almost light, but he knew her too well to miss the weight behind it. Jackson. Yeah, I'll be there. Saturday came gray and damp, the kind of Pacific Northwest morning that settled into your bones. He arrived early. Not by design, but because he couldn't sit still at home. The cafe was small and warm, with dark wood, yellow light, and indie music playing softly in the background. He chose a table by the window. When Lena walked in, he almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was pulled up. She wore a coat he'd never seen before. She looked good. Not in the made-up post-breakup kind of way, but in the centered way, like she'd been breathing cleaner air. Hey, she said, sliding into the chair across from him. Hey. The first few minutes were filled with the usual formalities. How work was going, how Carla's kids were, whether he'd tried that new breakfast spot on 39th. It felt strange, like interviewing someone you once shared a bed with. Then came the pause, the space between the polite and the real. I keep thinking about how it all got away from us, Jackson said. Lena looked down at her coffee. Yeah, it was like we were passengers in the same car but going different places. I didn't want it to end, he added after a beat. I didn't either, she said softly. But I didn't want to keep pretending, Jackson. I need to know who I am without us, for a little while at least. He nodded. It hurt, but it made sense in a way nothing else had. They talked for over an hour, not as husband and wife, not as enemies, just two people who had shared something important and broken it. When they stood to leave, Lena hesitated. Then, surprising both of them, she reached out and touched his arm. I'm glad we talked, she said. Really? Me too. They didn't hug, didn't promise to talk again, but they both left the cafe a little less broken. It was strange, Jackson thought, how absence could sharpen things. Sounds were clearer, his thoughts felt louder. For the first time in years, he found himself asking, who am I when no one's watching me? 3 weeks after the coffee with Lena, he dusted off his old guitar, the one tucked in the back of the hallway closet. He used to play all the time, before work took over, before quiet dinners turned into quieter arguments, before love became something they carefully stepped around. At first, his fingers fumbled over the chords, but after an hour, muscle memory returned like a forgotten friend. His fingers found the rhythm again, and so did his heart. He started going on evening walks, listening to old albums, reading poetry he used to roll his eyes at. He downloaded a meditation app, laughed at himself, and then, surprisingly, liked it. For once, life didn't feel like something he was late for. Meanwhile, Lena was discovering her own rhythm. Carla's guest room wasn't large, but it had a tiny balcony. Every morning, Lena would sit there with a cup of coffee and a blank sketch pad. She hadn't drawn anything in years, not since college. She'd told herself there wasn't time. That creativity was a luxury. But now, in the stillness of her separation, it felt like oxygen. Her first drawing was awful. The second, better. By the fifth, she could see lines turning into language. She started visiting art galleries again, took herself to lunch, left, her phone off for hours. It was terrifying at first, being alone with her thoughts. But slowly it began to feel like she wasn't alone at all. She was with herself, fully, finally. And every now and then she thought of Jackson, not with anger, not with longing, just with quiet curiosity. I wonder if he's okay. I wonder if he's different now. I wonder if I am. Neither of them reached out, but both of them, in their own quiet corners of Portland, were building something new, not to become better for each other, but better for themselves. Jackson almost canceled the Airbnb reservation. The trip to Big Sur had been booked months ago. The itinerary still sat on the fridge, magnet-pinned like a joke from another life. He hovered over the cancel reservation button for nearly a minute, then impulsively he packed. He didn't bring much, just a weekend bag, a notebook, and his guitar. The drive down the coast was familiar, but felt strange without Lena beside him, reading road signs aloud, pointing out weird billboards, singing half the lyrics to Fleetwood Mac songs. When he arrived in Big Sur, the fog was just beginning to lift. The Airbnb was a small cabin tucked beneath a grove of redwoods. The silence was sacred. That night he built a fire in the pit outside and sat alone with a glass of red wine, staring up at the stars. He didn't feel sad, just still. He woke up early the next morning and hiked the coastline trail they'd once talked about. He took photos, not for social media, but for memory's sake. As he sat on a rock overlooking the Pacific, the wind playing with his hoodie strings, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. That evening, just as the sun began to dip into the ocean, he heard the crunch of gravel behind him. Turning, he saw her, Lena. She was standing by the edge of the trees, backpack slung over one shoulder, wind catching the loose strands of her hair. He stood slowly, unsure if he was imagining her. "Hey," she said. He blinked. "What are you doing here?" "I booked a cabin, a few miles down the road," she replied. I remembered the dates, thought I'd come, see what it felt like. He chuckled, stunned. "You're full of surprises." "So are you." They sat down by the fire, saying little at first. Just the sound of the wind, the ocean, and the fire crackling. Eventually, she said, "I didn't come here to fix us. I just came because I didn't want to regret not showing up." He looked at her. "Then I'm glad you did." They clinked glasses without a toast, and the fire burned on. The fire had burned low, just glowing embers now. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was familiar, the kind they had once shared in comfortable moments. But tonight, it held the weight of everything left to be said. Lena stared into the orange light. "You know, part of me thought maybe something would shift, seeing you again, being here." Jackson kept his eyes on the flames. "And did it?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, "No, it didn't." He nodded, the honesty hitting like wind. Strong but not cruel. "Yeah, same." Lena pulled her knees to her chest, arms wrapped around them. "I wanted so badly for this to be a clean story. A couple breaks up, finds themselves, comes back stronger. But life's not a screenplay." He smiled, bittersweet. "No, it's not." A long pause stretched between them. "I still care about you," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I always will, but I think we stopped growing together a long time ago." Jackson swallowed hard and started surviving side by side instead of living. She glanced at him, eyes shining in the firelight. Exactly. They sat there absorbing the finality of it, the acknowledgement that what they had couldn't be revived, that sometimes love didn't die in a blaze. It eroded over time, grain by grain, until one day you woke up in a life that didn't fit anymore. "Thank you for meeting me here," Lena said, standing slowly. "Thank you for coming," Jackson replied. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small folded sketch. "I drew this last week. Wasn't sure if I'd give it to you." He opened it. It was a sketch of a man sitting alone on a cliff, staring out at the sea. Peaceful, but solitary. The lines were soft, the emotion raw. "I think that's you," she said. "Not sad, just searching." Jackson traced the edge of the paper. "It's beautiful." They didn't hug. They didn't promise anything. Lena turned and walked toward the trail, and Jackson watched her disappear into the night. The cabin was quiet after she left. Jackson didn't sleep that night. He lay on the couch with the sketch in his hand and the ache of something permanent in his chest. There was no dramatic breakup scene, no shouting, no broken plates, no slammed doors, just truth. Just the quiet understanding that their time together had run its course. The next morning he packed up early. The drive home was slow. Along the winding roads of Big Sur, the ocean gleamed beside him, massive, indifferent, beautiful. As he pulled off for coffee in a small town, he looked over and thought for a moment that he saw her car at the other end of the lot. But it wasn't hers. It didn't matter. By the time he reached Portland, the house felt different. It no longer echoed with her absence. It just was a space. His space. He framed the sketch she gave him and hung it in the hallway. Lena didn't return to her sister's. She got her own apartment, a third-floor walk-up filled with light and silence. She painted the walls herself, seafoam green. Sometimes she'd walk through the art museum alone, just to be surrounded by things that made her feel. She saw couples holding hands, and sometimes she felt the sting of memory. But mostly, she felt calm, whole, even in solitude. Jackson saw her once at a bookstore. Their eyes met from across the room. No wave, no smile, just a knowing glance, a nod. And then they both turned away. Because some endings aren't meant to be rewritten. And some people, no matter how deeply loved, are only meant to walk beside you for a while, not stay. A year later, Jackson stood on the same cliff where Lena had once handed him the sketch. The air was colder now, saltier. He didn't come for closure, that had already happened. He came to remember, to honor the version of himself that loved deeply and let go gracefully. Lena, across the city, dipped her brush into a deep blue and painted slow strokes across a blank canvas. Not of the past, not of what could have been, but of the horizon. They never spoke again, and yet somehow they would always carry pieces of each other. Quiet, invisible, but real. Have you ever loved someone so deeply, only to realize that letting go was the kindest thing you could do, for both of you? Sometimes love doesn't end in disaster. Sometimes it ends in quiet courage. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on the people who shaped you, even if they didn't stay. Share this with someone who's learning how to grow on their own path, or who needs to know it's okay to walk away with grace. Because healing isn't always about returning. Sometimes it's about walking forward, alone but finally free. Oh, and consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. Take care.